The terminal clock blinked 11:47 p.m., casting its cold glow over the near-empty train platform of Eastridge Station. Clara Bennett pushed through the weary trickle of late-night commuters, her steps heavy with exhaustion. A paint-smudged apron clung to her like a second skin, tied messily over a thrift store coat with loose buttons. Her once tidy hair now curled wildly from a 16-hour day, strands falling into tired eyes. Over one shoulder hung her tattered canvas bag inside, only the crusts of a sandwich she hadn't finished and a sketchbook with worn edges. She gripped the strap tightly, as if the bag contained every last fragile piece of the life she was holding together. Clara's day had started at 6 a.m., with the clatter of espresso machines at Harbor Roasters, where she served up cappuccinos to impatient suits who barely acknowledged her. By noon, she was elbows deep in finger paints, coaxing creativity from distracted children at the Community Youth Center. Dinner hours belonged to Marcelli's trattoria, where she wove between tables, balancing hot plates and tired smiles, earning tips that disappeared as quickly as they came. 3 jobs, 7 days a week, all to pay for a future she wasn't sure she'd reach in, for a father battling a rare and expensive illness that insurance refused to fully cover. 6 months ago, the man who raised her on bedtime stories and backyard gardens had been diagnosed with degenerative heart failure. Clara's dreams of finishing art school had vanished overnight. She hadn't painted in months. Not truly. Not since her final semester was traded for endless double shifts and medical bills that seemed to multiply faster than she could count. Tonight, though, all she wanted was to get home without crying. Clara squinted at the flimsy ticket in her hand. Car 8, seat to 4A. Her vision blurred as she blinked, her feet moving automatically as the silver train rolled into the station with a mechanical sigh. A whoosh of warm air greeted her as she boarded, thawing the sting in her fingertips. The car was nearly empty and oddly luxurious. Instead of the scratchy blue fabric she remembered from her usual route, this carriage had buttery leather seats that gleamed under soft overhead lighting. Confused but too tired to care, Clara stumbled down the aisle and sank into the closest empty seat. She barely glanced at the seat number. The leather was warm and supple, welcoming her like a hug. Her body surrendered before she could second-guess herself. She leaned back, eyes fluttering closed, and then darkness. Deep, uninterrupted sleep. At precisely 11:50 p.m., Julian Ward stepped onto the train platform with quiet efficiency. He wore a tailored overcoat over a sleek charcoal suit, every line crisp, not a hair out of place. At 29, Julian was the kind of man whose name appeared in Forbes headlines and quarterly financials. His company, Ward Tech, had started as a dorm room side hustle. Now, it was a multi-billion-dollar tech empire that practically ran itself if Julian wasn't such a relentless perfectionist. Trailing behind him was Liam, his assistant, scanning a digital tablet with practiced precision. You have a 12 a.m. call with the Tokyo division. The projections for Q3 are in the folder at your seat. The merger contracts have been finalized. Julian nodded without breaking stride, already anticipating the numbers. Thursday nights were Socrates' only ritual, and touched by his empire, a quiet 2-hour train ride where no one could call, text, or interrupt. Except tonight, Julian stopped cold halfway down the aisle of car 8. There, in his reserved seat, same one he had chosen every Thursday for the past 2 years, Samine was fast asleep. A woman, she was curled up against the window like a forgotten painting, cheeks flushed from the cold, dark lashes brushing the tops of pale cheeks, lips parted in dreamless slumber. Her clothes bore the chaos of color, paint smears on her sleeves, graphite stains on her fingers, a single red mark near her collarbone. She was clearly not from his world. Liam stepped forward, already raising a brow. Shall I wake her? Security can relocate her if necessary. Julian raised one hand. No, leave her, sir. That's your reserved. She needs this more than I do. Liam hesitated, unsure. Julian's eyes stayed fixed on the girl. Something in her stillness tugged at a long-forgotten corner of him. In a world where everyone wore masks There was something painfully honest about her vulnerability. He nodded toward another seat. I'll take that one. And so, the CEO of one of the world's most powerful tech firms sat across from a sleeping stranger, content to observe the quiet rhythm of her breath and the way her fingers curled protectively around a sketchbook. Clara stirred slowly, her consciousness returning like sunbeams through a fogged window. She blinked, confused by the rich scent of leather and the low murmur of voices outside the glass. The train was slowing. Her heart lurched. Had she missed her stop? She sat up quickly and her eyes locked onto a man sitting directly across from her, well-dressed, sharp, and definitely watching her. "Good morning," he said with a faint smile, voice rich and calm. "Technically, past midnight, but who's counting?" Clara flushed crimson, her limbs jerking as she scrambled to grab her bag. "Oh no, my gosh, I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I must have at this. Isn't he think I sat in the wrong car?" "You did," he said, still perfectly at ease. "But you looked peaceful. I didn't want to wake you." She froze halfway out of the seat. "I really should move. I can't afford first class." He tilted his head. "Where do any of us truly belong?" Clara blinked. The words disarmed her. "I'm Julian," he added, closing the magazine he hadn't really been reading. "And you?" "Claire," she murmured. "Clara Bennett. You've had a long day, Clara Bennett." She laughed under her breath, a little embarrassed. 3 jobs will do that to a person. Julian's brow lifted, genuinely intrigued. 3. Morning shift at a coffee shop. Afternoons teaching art at the youth center. Evenings at Marcelli's, waiting tables. And here I thought running a company was tiring. For the first time in hours, something warm bloomed in Clara's chest. A stranger had not only noticed her but listened. It felt rare. "Are you an artist?" he asked. Clara hesitated, then reached for her sketchbook. "I used to be. I guess I still am. I haven't had time to really paint in a while." He watched her carefully as she opened the book. The pages were filled with sketches, a couple arguing at a cafe table, a child mid-laughter, an old man staring out a subway window. Raw, beautiful moments, not posed real. "These are extraordinary," Julian murmured. "You see people." "No one ever says that," Clara whispered. "I do," he replied softly, "because it's true." As the train glided through the night, conversation flowed like an unexpected melody. Clara talked about her father's illness, her abandoned dreams, the impossible weight of responsibility. Julian shared stories of his childhood raised by a mother who worked nights to make sure he never missed a field trip or a book fair. "My mother cleaned banks after hours so I could have sketch pads," he said quietly. "She always told me, learn everything you can. That's the one thing they can't take from you." She sounds incredible. She was. And for a brief moment, the differences between them dissolved. The billionaire and the waitress, the tech mogul and the painter, just 2 people sharing silence, stories, and something too new to name. As the train neared Clara's stop, she stood reluctantly, already missing the strange piece of this unexpected bubble. "Thank you," she said, adjusting her bag, "for letting me stay, and for listening." Julian rose too, surprising even himself. "Would you have coffee with me sometime?" She blinked. "I work at a coffee shop." "I meant when you're not working at one." A laugh escaped her lips, light, hopeful. He reached into his coat, pulling out a card. Not a business card but a handwritten number. "Call me," he said, "even if it's at midnight." Clara took it, eyes searching his. "I will." And then she stepped into the cool night, heart fluttering in ways she didn't dare explain. She had no idea who Julian really was. Not yet. But she had a feeling this was only the beginning. Sunlight poured through the thin blinds of Clara's small bedroom, warming her cheeks and nudging her awake. She stirred beneath a worn quilt, blinking up at the pale ceiling as the memories of the night before slowly returned. The rhythmic rumble of the train, the smell of leather seats, the sound of his voice calm, smooth, curious. Julian, her hand shifted on the bed, and she realized she was still holding something. A card. She sat up abruptly. There it was, creased from sleep, the ink slightly smudged at the corners, but still clear. Julian Ward, a handwritten number. For a moment, Clara just stared at it. Had it all actually happened? Had she really fallen asleep in the wrong train car, been allowed to stay, and then spent an hour talking about art and life with a complete stranger? Not a stranger. Julian, the man with storm gray eyes and an oddly quiet presence. He had seemed so grounded, so present for someone who clearly operated on a whole other level of existence. A knock on her bedroom door pulled her out of her thoughts. Claire, Tessa's voice called. You're gonna be late again. Claire jumped out of bed. I overslept. You've got 20 minutes till your shift. The kitchen was filled with the aroma of burnt toast and cheap instant coffee. Tessa, her best friend and roommate since college, stood by the counter in a sleek blazer, applying lipstick in a small compact mirror. She looked every bit the polished marketing executive, even before 8 a.m. Clara, in contrast, looked like a sleep-deprived hurricane. Still, something in her expression was lighter. You're glowing, Tessa noted, raising a brow as she stirred sugar into her mug. Clara froze, toast halfway to her mouth. I am not. Tessa smirked. You so are. You didn't come home until after midnight. And now you're smiling at your toast like it just proposed marriage. Spill. Clara hesitated, then placed the slice on the plate. I met someone on the train. Tessa's eyes widened, the compact snapping shut. Excuse me? We talked, just talked, for almost an hour. Clara reached into her coat pocket and handed her the card. He gave me this. Tessa accepted the card, scanning it. Her eyebrows began to rise, higher and higher. She looked up slowly. Clara, do you know who this is? I mean, Julian, Clara said. He didn't say his last name. I just assumed, something normal, like Julie and Miller, or Julie and Thompson. Tessa grabbed her phone and started typing furiously. A moment later, she turned the screen toward Clara. There, in pristine high definition, was a photo of the man from the train flanked by reporters, emerging from a black car in a sleek tailored suit. Julian Ward, founder and CEO of Ward Tech, net worth $4.2 billion, New York's youngest tech mogul. Clara's stomach dropped. No way, Tessa said with a smirk. You fell asleep on Julie and Ward. You sat in the wrong seat and woke up on the shoulder of one of the richest men in the country. Clara sank into a chair, card trembling in her hand. He didn't tell me. Of course he didn't. Probably because it's the first time someone's talked to him without knowing who he is. She stared at the news article again. It didn't feel real. The Julian in the photo looked untouchable, cold, flanked by flashing lights and headlines. Not the man who had asked about her sketches with quiet reverence. Not the man who had offered her his seat and really listened to her talk about art and kids and long hours. Tessa reached over and squeezed Clara's hand. You didn't do anything wrong. And honestly, he probably needed that conversation more than you did. Clara smiled faintly. It was the first time I felt like someone saw me. Not the waitress. Not the exhausted barista. Me. Sunrise Cafe, 9:13 a.m. The bell above the cafe door chimed with its usual tired jingle as Clara slid behind the counter. The early shift was already bustling. Customers barked orders. A toddler screamed over spilled orange juice, and the espresso machine wheezed like it might die mid-latte. Clara moved through the motions automatically grinned, temp, steam, pour, but her mind was somewhere else. Every few minutes, her hand would brush the edge of her apron pocket, where Julian's card now rested like a secret promise. By late morning, the cafe was packed with the usual stream of business types and college students. Claire was halfway through an order for a caramel macchiato when the front door opened again. She didn't look up at first, not until the murmurs started. Is that him? Dude, that's Julian Ward. Clara's head snapped up. There he was, walking calmly toward her, dressed down in dark jeans, a black sweater, and a subtle gray scarf. No entourage, no tablet-toting assistant, just Julian looking absurdly out of place among the chaotic buzz of Sunrise Cafe. He stepped up to the counter like any other customer. 1 coffee, please, he said with a gentle smile. and maybe a chance to explain. Clara stared. Customers behind him began pulling out their phones. Julian didn't seem to notice. Still stunned, she moved into action, ground the beans, poured the coffee, slid it across the counter with a shaking hand. "You could have told me," she said, barely audible over the din. "Would it have changed the conversation?" he asked quietly. Clara paused. "Probably. I wouldn't have shown you my sketches. I definitely wouldn't have complained about working 3 jobs to someone who owns half the city. That's exactly why I didn't tell you." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Why, for 1 hour," Julian said, voice low. "I got to just be Julian, not a CEO, not a name on a list, just a person talking to someone real." Clara blinked against the sudden pressure behind her eyes. Julian turned to find a table, but the manager approached, offering him a private seat in the back. He declined politely and chose a spot in the corner by the window. And then he waited for 3 hours, through the lunch rush, through the second espresso rush, sipping his single cup of coffee like it was all he needed. When Clara finally untied her apron and clocked out, Julian stood. "Walk with me?" he asked. They strolled through the quiet streets near the cafe, the crunch of leaves underfoot marking the only sound for a while. Then Julian spoke. "I did some research last night," he said. "On you." Clara stopped walking. "You investigated me?" "I wanted to help," he said quickly. "Your father's condition, the treatments, I know what they cost." She turned to him, eyes blazing. "I don't want your charity. It's not charity, it's recognition." He pulled out his phone and showed her a webpage. "The Ward Foundation, a grant program for educators and artists. We already fund programs like this. I'd just be fast-tracking one for you. No strings, just help." Clara stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Her father, the bills, the endless grind. "Of course there'd be conditions," she whispered. "Only one," Julian said, slipping the phone back into his coat. "Dinner, tonight. No pressure, no expectations. Just 2 people, talking." Clara didn't answer right away, but she didn't say no. By 6:15 p.m., Clara was standing in front of her tiny bedroom mirror, clutching a vintage black dress that had seen more hopeful days. Her hands shook as she tugged at the zipper, her nerves fraying with each passing second. The last time she had worn this dress was to her cousin's engagement party 2 years ago. It had been too big then. Now, it fit just right, a bit snug around the shoulders. "Let me help," Tessa said, stepping in with a bobby pin clenched between her teeth. Clara exhaled. "I don't know why I'm doing this." "Yes, you do," Tessa said, smoothing the dress over Clara's hips. "Because deep down, you want to believe that someone like him sees something in you that isn't about money or convenience." "But what if he's just bored?" Clara whispered. "What if this is just some novelty for him?" Tessa turned her by the shoulders and looked her squarely in the eyes. "Claire, that man sat in your cafe for 3 hours. Not in a limo, not in a penthouse boardroom. He waited, in full view of the world, just to walk you home. That doesn't scream novelty." Claire swallowed hard. "I'm scared." "Good," Tessa said. "That means it's real." At 7 p.m. sharp, a sleek black car pulled up in front of Clara's building, yet a stretch limousine. Not flashy, just elegant, understated. Like him, Julian was already standing outside when she descended the stoop, his eyes scanning the street until they landed on her. The look he gave her wasn't performative, it was quiet, awestruck, like someone finding warmth in the middle of winter. "You look," he started, then shook his head, as if words were failing him. "You look like art." Clara laughed nervously. "You clean up all right yourself." He opened the door for her like it was the most natural thing in the world, and she stepped into a vehicle that smelled faintly of Darwa and sophistication. Clara expected a towering 5-star hotel or an exclusive rooftop lounge. Instead, the car stopped in front of a small Italian bistro tucked into a quiet corner of West Village. Soft yellow lights glowed in the windows. The smell of basil and garlic drifted onto the sidewalk. "This isn't what I imagined," she admitted as they walked inside. "That's kind of the point," Julian said. I wanted to take you somewhere we could actually talk. The hostess greeted Julian by name, but without fanfare. They were seated at a quiet corner table near a brick fireplace, and Clara was struck by how comfortable it all felt. This wasn't a staged performance. This was a man trying to be human, not a headline. Over wine and plates of hand-rolled pasta, they began to talk about everything except money. Julian told her about his mother, how she had worked overnight cleaning offices so he could afford books and sketchpads. She passed away just before war tech really took off, he said softly. She never saw the success, the headlines, but she saw the dream. Clara reached across the table, touching his hand. She saw you. That's what matters. He smiled faintly. She used to say the richest people in the world weren't the ones with the most, but the ones with something to give. And now you give scholarships? Claire asked. I try, but sometimes it feels like I've just built walls. Money can do that. Clara nodded. You'd be surprised how similar it feels on the other side. When you're poor, people don't see you either. They see the waitress, the charity case, the easy target. There was a long pause, and then Julian said, That's why I noticed you. Clara blinked. What do you mean? Because you weren't trying to sell me anything. You weren't trying to impress me. You were just real. They walked through the city, the streets twinkling with fairy lights in the last sighs of autumn. Julian led her to a small gallery nestled between two brownstones. The windows glowed with soft light, illuminating paintings by local artists. I wanted to show you something, he said, pulling out his phone. He tapped open an email thread correspondence with the director of the Metropolitan School of Art. They've agreed to pilot a new scholarship program, he said. Full tuition, art supplies, a monthly stipend. I want you to be the first recipient. Clara froze. You're offering me, not offering, inviting, to pick up where you left off, to finish what you started. Clara's throat tightened. Julian, I can't accept that. It's too much. It's not charity, he said gently. The program includes a requirement. Recipients have to teach art to underprivileged kids for 2 years after graduation. Tears stung her eyes. Her father's medical bills, her dreams, her future, all wrapped up in this moment. I don't know if I can be part of your world, she whispered. Julian stepped closer. You don't have to be part of my world. We can build something new. Together, they stood outside her apartment building, the city humming softly around them. Clara's heart pounded. I need time, she said, to think about the scholarship, about my dad, about us. Julian nodded. I understand, but I have conditions, she said. He smiled. Hit me. 1. I want to pay back every cent of my dad's medical bills once I'm working as an artist. Done. 2. If this foundation's going to support artists, I want to say in who gets the grants. Absolutely. She hesitated, then stepped closer. And 3, I need to know you're not going to disappear when this stops being exciting. Julian reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I've spent years building a company worth billions, and none of it has meant as much as that 1 hour with you on a train. This isn't a thrill. This is the most real thing I've ever known. He kissed her, then soft and steady, like a promise being sealed in moonlight. When Clara finally stepped back into her apartment, she was breathless, not just from the kiss, but from what it meant. That someone like Julian Ward had seen her, listened to her, and believed in her. She glanced down at her worn sketchbook still tucked under her arm. She suddenly couldn't wait to open it again. 3 weeks passed like a dream, moving and fast forward between long shifts at Sunrise Cafe, tutoring art students at the youth center, and evenings painting in the converted closet she called a studio. Clara Bennett's life had begun to shift imperceptibly at first, then rapidly, like color bleeding into a gray sketch. The scholarship papers were signed. Her father had begun treatment at a leading clinic, fully funded by the Ward Foundation. And Clara, she was painting again, not just doodles in margins, but actual canvas and filtered emotions taking shape through charcoal and oil. Still, nothing compared to what awaited her on this particular evening. The annual Ward Foundation Gala. Julian had invited her as his official guest, and Clara had hesitated for days before saying yes. It wasn't just nerves. It was the reality of stepping into a world that whispered in a language she'd never learned, where diamonds spoke louder than words, and dinner cost more than her month's rent. Now, she stood inside a boutique that smelled faintly of roses and leather, staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror. The gown was emerald green, off the shoulder, the fabric cascading round her like a river of light. It shimmered with quiet confidence, but Clara could hardly breathe under the weight of the moment. "I feel like I borrowed someone else's life," she said aloud. "You borrowed their dress," Tessa corrected from behind her. "But the life? You're earning that yourself." Clara gave a tight smile. "It doesn't feel real." Tessa stepped forward, adjusting the delicate chain around her friend's neck. Julian didn't fall for a fantasy, Clara. He fell for the girl with paint on her hands and truth in her eyes. Don't forget that. Julian was waiting outside in a black tuxedo that looked like it had been stitched onto him by angels. When he saw Clara descending the steps, he didn't speak right away. His eyes softened, and his usual unreadable expression gave way to quiet awe. "You look beyond beautiful," he finally said. "You don't look so bad yourself," she teased, trying not to trip on her heels as he opened the car door for her. The inside of the limousine was dimly lit, warm, and quiet. Clara held her clutch with both hands, trying to keep from wringing it. "You're sure I belong at this thing?" Julian turned to her, his voice steady. "You belong wherever you choose to be, especially tonight." The ballroom of the Meridian Hotel was a glittering cathedral of glass and gold. Crystal chandeliers reflected in polished floors, and champagne flowed like water. Everywhere Clara looked, she saw money. Not just wealth but legacy. Names that belonged on skyscrapers. Faces that appeared in magazines. People who had never worried about rent or medical bills. Julian guided her gently through the crowd, greeting donors, board members, and CEOs with effortless charm. Clara kept pace, nodding politely, replying when spoken to. But she felt the stares, the veiled curiosity, the condescending smiles. "So you're the young woman from the train," one man said with a smirk. "Teaching art, is it? That's adorable," another commented, voice dripping with performative sweetness. Clara clenched her teeth and smiled through it until she appeared. "Julian," a voice cooed from behind. They turned to see a woman gliding toward them in silver satin. Caroline Whitmore, heiress, socialite, and very much aware of her place at the top of the social pyramid. "I was wondering when you'd arrive," Caroline purred, her eyes flicking to Clara with a smile as sharp as crystal. "And who you'd bring." Julian placed a steady hand on Clara's back. "Caroline, this is Clara Bennett. Clara, meet Caroline Whitmore." Clara extended her hand. "It's nice to meet you." Caroline accepted it lightly, as if touching a porcelain figurine. "Likewise." "And what do your parents do, Clara?" Clara hesitated. "My father's recovering from heart surgery. My mother passed away when I was young." "Oh," Caroline replied, her smile faltering only slightly. "How tragic. And I hear you're an artist. That's such a charming hobby." "It's not a hobby," Clara said, her voice firm. "It's my profession, or it will be." Caroline blinked once, then smiled wider. "How delightful. Julian has always been such a patron of the arts." And with that, she turned and drifted into the crowd, leaving Clara flushed with anger and embarrassment. Julian leaned close. "You handled that perfectly. She makes me feel like a street rat who snuck in through the servants' entrance." "Then she sees what I see," Julian replied. "Someone worth noticing." Later in the evening, as dinner was served and a string quartet played softly in the background, Julian tensed beside her. Claire followed his gaze across the room and her blood ran cold. A tall man with silver-streaked hair, flanked by executives, made his way toward them. His smile was polished, but his eyes were sharp as razors. "Julian," he said smoothly. "Wonderful event, as always." "Richard," Julian replied, his tone neutral. Richard Blackstone turned to Clara, eyes gleaming. And you must be the infamous Clara Bennett. I've heard so much about you. Clara straightened her spine. All good things, I hope. Oh, of course. It's fascinating how quickly you've become so important to Julian's happiness. Claire forced a smile. Well, I aim to please. Richard's expression didn't falter. That must be quite the burden being the emotional keystone of a man with such substantial holdings. So much to lose if something were to shake that foundation. Julian stood, his voice quiet and dangerous. Richard, I think it's time for you to return to your table. Richard lifted his glass in a mock toast. Just saying, business can be so fragile when hearts get involved. Clara watched him walk away, a knot forming in her chest. What was that about? She asked. Blackstone's been looking for leverage for years, Julian said. Tonight he thinks he found it. You mean me? Julian met her gaze. You are not leverage. You're the only real thing in this room. Back at Julian's penthouse, the city stretched out like a glittering ocean beneath them. Clara paced the living room, her gown whispering against the marble floors. He's going to come after me, she said. To get to you, I won't let that happen. What if you have to choose, Julian? She asked. Me or your empire? He crossed the room and took her hands. Do you know what I was doing the night before I met you? She shook her head. I was sitting in my office at midnight, surrounded by reports, profits, deadlines, and I felt nothing, just numb. I had everything money could buy, but I couldn't remember the last time I felt anything. He reached up, brushing her cheek with his thumb. Then you fell asleep in my seat, and I remembered what it felt like to care, to hope. Blackstone can take everything, but if I lose you, I lose the only thing that makes any of this mean something. Clara felt her defenses crumble, and in their place, clarity. The next morning, Clara stood in her apartment studio, surrounded by fresh canvases. Paint covered her hands, her arms, even a streak across her cheek. Tesser stepped inside and gasped, Clara, these are like nothing you've ever painted. Clara stepped back, eyes wide as she surveyed her work pieces full of color, fury, beauty, and truth. I'm painting what's real, she said softly. Love, class, fear, hope, what it feels like to be judged, to be chosen, to belong and still not fit in. They're brilliant, Tesser whispered. Clara nodded. They're me. 1 month later, Clara Bennett stood inside the pristine, echoing halls of the Whitmore Gallery, arguably the most prestigious exhibition space in Manhattan. Her name was printed in gold foil at the entrance, and filtered, New Works by Clara Bennett. Below the title, a short inscription read, a collection exploring the collision of love, class, identity and the spaces in between. Clara's heart thundered in her chest. She had once doodled on napkins during cafe breaks. Now, her work hung alongside names that had built careers over decades. How did this happen? It began with Julian. After the gala, her creativity had erupted. Her emotions conflict, longing, fear, and wonder poured onto canvas. The result, 22 pieces, each one raw, unpolished, and alive. Julian had secured the gallery with a single phone call, but he refused to let her be the billionaire's girlfriend playing at being an artist. He wanted her to be seen, and tonight, the world was watching. As guests arrived, Clara lingered in the corner beside Tesser, dressed in a deep red cocktail dress and trying not to chew her lip raw. Critics, collectors, celebrities walked the space in slow reverence. Many recognized her, but they didn't approach her like some accessory. They whispered about her work. One painting featured a faceless crowd in a ballroom, champagne glasses raised in hollow toasts. Another, her most personal, depicted a young woman asleep on a train seat, the world rushing past her outside. Across from her sat a man, painted in grayscale, watching her with quiet sorrow and hope. That was Julian. That was their beginning. I feel like I'm looking at truth, murmured one woman beside her. These aren't just paintings, said another. They're confessions. A well-known critic stood silently before a canvas titled The Gap, which showed to Hansen painted in vivid color, the other in sterile black and white, almost touching. separated by a shimmering void of gold. Clara Bennett has offered us something painfully rare. The critic would later write, art that does not pander, does not flatter, and does not apologize. By the end of the evening, every single piece had sold most to private collectors who had never been moved enough to compete for art before. Clara stood in stunned silence. Julian approached her quietly, his expression unreadable. They see you now, he said. She blinked back tears. I think I finally see myself. Just when Clara thought the night couldn't get more surreal, Julian stepped onto the low stage set up in the center of the gallery for announcements. The crowd fell silent. Glasses stopped midair. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. I want to thank you all for coming, Julian said, voice strong, measured, and especially for supporting Clara Bennett not just as an artist, but as someone brave enough to show us all what it means to be vulnerable. He paused, then he turned, facing her directly. And if you'll allow one more interruption tonight, I'd like to ask a question. Clara's breath caught. Julian descended the steps, weaving through the crowd. He stopped in front of her, slowly, deliberately. He reached into his jacket pocket and lowered himself onto one knee. The entire room seemed to gasp. Clara Bennett, he said, eyes never leaving hers. You fell asleep in my seat and woke me up in every possible way. You reminded me of everything I forgot: joy, meaning, humility, wonder. He opened a velvet box, revealing a ring with a simple, elegant designea single sapphire encircled by tiny diamonds. I don't want a world without you in it. Will you marry me? The room held its breath. Clara stared at him. This man who had once been a stranger in a midnight train car. This man who saw through surface and status. Who gave, not because he needed to, but because he believed. Yes, she said. The room erupted. Applause, cheers, flashes of camera bulbs. But none of it registered. Clara saw only Julian. 6 months later, the wedding was held not in a palace or castle, but in the place that mattered most to Clarice Community Center, where she used to teach art. White fairy lights were strung across the ceiling. Kids she had taught over the years served as flower bearers. Julian wore a tailored navy suit. Clara wore her mother's pendant. Tesser stood proudly by her side as maid of honor. Julian's closest friend from college served as best man. The guests weren't shareholders or royalty, they were family, staff, teachers, nurses, fellow artists. Caroline Whitmore was not invited. Richard Blackstone, whose schemes had backfired spectacularly when Julian refused to retaliate, was nowhere near the guest list. In fact, many investors had grown more loyal toward tech, citing Julian's integrity and vision. Julian didn't just marry Clara, he evolved with her. Knight Industries, now co-managed by Clara through the foundation's creative branch, launched an initiative for underprivileged artists across the country. They funded studios, scholarships, community exhibits. Clara finished her degree with honors and helped design the curriculum for a new generation of artists who had once been invisible. They bought a modest brownstone on the east side, walking distance from the youth center. Julian still ran his empire, but now he came home to canvases, warm meals, and laughter. On their first wedding anniversary, Julian found Clara in her studio, barefoot and covered in paint, working on a canvas titled The Beginning. It depicted two perspectives: a woman asleep, crumpled in a train seat, and a man watching her quietly, the beginnings of hope in his eyes. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Do you ever regret it? He whispered. Clara leaned back against him. Would giving up a normal life with someone from your world? She turned in his arms, eyes shining. You are my world now. Not the headlines, not the suits, just you. The man who let a stranger rest because she looked like she needed sleep. Julian kissed her temple. I still think about that moment every single day. So do I, she whispered. And in that moment, surrounded by light, paint, and possibility, Clara realized that the girl who had once stumbled onto a train, half asleep and half broken, had found more than a miracle. She had found home. The world didn't pause just because Clara and Julian said I do. The honeymoon glow faded into mornings filled with mismatched schedules, late-night meetings, studio deadlines, and above all the very real pressure of living up to the life they were building. The wedding had been the easy part. It was the life after that required the real commitment. For the first few months, everything hummed like a well-balanced painting. Julian commuted to his corporate headquarters across the city, still entrenched in the daily storm of billion-dollar meetings and boardroom debates. Clara, now both student and artist in residence through the Ward Foundation Scholarship, split her days between her art, her classes, and working with young, aspiring creators in underserved neighborhoods. But even love built on truth and vulnerability was not immune to tension. It started small: missed dinners, canceled plans, short responses to texts, long silences over breakfast. Clara understood Julian's world was demanding, but she couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that they were slowly becoming polite passengers in their own shared space. One Thursday evening, she returned from teaching a mural workshop at the East Harlem Youth Center and found Julian still on a conference call, pacing the living room in his dress shirt and no tie. His phone was pressed to his ear as 3 screens displayed graphs she didn't recognize. "I'll circle back on the acquisition terms in 20, he said, signaling to her with a raised finger that he'd be with her shortly. Claire dropped her bag and walked quietly into the kitchen. That night, they ate dinner in silence. The pasta was warm, but something between them had cooled. It wasn't until the weekend that Claire finally broke the stillness. They were folding laundry, an odd domestic ritual they developed between gallery exhibits and quarterly reports. "Do you ever miss it?" Claire asked, not looking up from the socks in her lap. "Miss what?" Julian replied, distracted. "Before all this, before us, when your days were just spreadsheets and projections. No art, no chaos." He paused. "No, why would you think that?" Clara hesitated. "Because sometimes you look like you're carrying everything alone again. Like we're back to being strangers on opposite sides of the train car." Julian set down the shirt in his hands. "Clara, I have never missed the days before you." "Then why don't you talk to me anymore?" His eyes snapped to hers. "I talk to you every day." "No," she said gently. "You update me. You inform me. But you used to share things, ideas, feelings, dreams. Now, it's just bullet points." Julian sat down on the edge of the bed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You're right." The admission stunned her. "I've been retreating," he confessed. "Old habits. When things get too loud, I shut down. And I guess I thought I was protecting you from all of it." "I don't need protection," Clara said, sitting beside him. "I need partnership." He looked at her then, really looked, and nodded. That night, they talked until the city outside their windows faded into dawn. And something shifted, not just in their marriage but in Julian's empire. "Your foundation is doing incredible work," Clara told him. "But it's still a branch, a side project. What if it became part of the company's core?" Julian raised an eyebrow. "You want to integrate the arts initiative into WordTech?" "Why not?" she said, eyes shining. "Why can't a tech giant also be a cultural leader? Sponsor programs, create innovation hubs that include not just coders, but creators. Build spaces where engineers and artists collaborate." Julian sat in thoughtful silence. Then he smiled. "That's actually brilliant." The board, however, didn't agree. At the next quarterly meeting, Julian and Clara presented the idea for the Mosaic Initiativia multi-department fusion program combining technological research with creative arts mentorship. It was bold, expensive, and conventional. "You want us to fund what amounts to glorified after-school programs?" One executive scoffed. "With all due respect," Clara replied, standing calmly at the front of the conference room, "if we don't invest in creative thinking, there won't be anyone left to solve your next generation of problems." Another board member leaned back, unimpressed. "You married her, Julian. That doesn't mean we have to let her rebrand the company." Julian stood. "I didn't bring Clara into this room because she's my wife. I brought her because she's the smartest voice we haven't been listening to." Silence fell across the table. WordTech was built on disruption, Julian continued. This is the next evolution. We're not just creating technology anymore, we're shaping the culture it lives in. After a long pause, the board voted. The motion passed by one vote. 6 months later, the pilot campuses of the Mosaic Initiative launched in 3 cities. Each was part co-working space, part classroom, part gallery. At one hub in Brooklyn, a teenage coder and a muralist collaborated on a digital installation that went viral. In Chicago, an ex-foster child's poetry was incorporated into the user interface of a mental health app. And in San Francisco, a musician used sound design to improve accessibility in wearable tech. Investors were stunned. Ward Tech's image transformed overnight from a cold software empire to a visionary force of human-centered innovation. Julian's phone rang constantly with media interviews, partnership offers, and conference invitations. But he made time. Every evening, he came home. Clara's art continued to evolve. Her second exhibition titled Growing Pains focused on her first year of marriage, the pressure of visibility, and the quiet resilience of intimacy. One piece, titled Stillness in Motion, showed 2 figures sitting back to back separate, but joined by a golden thread. Critics called it haunting. Julian called it us. On their 2nd anniversary, Julian handed Clara an envelope before breakfast. Inside was a train ticket. Same time, same destination, just like the one she'd used the night they met. Thought we could revisit where it all began, he said. Clara smiled. Only if I get to sit in your seat again. They rode the train together that night, wrapped in each other, in the soft rhythm of the tracks. But this time, they were wide awake, and neither had any intention of letting go. It began as a whisper, a blurry screenshot posted to an anonymous message board, a leaked email chain, nothing with context, just enough ambiguity to raise eyebrows and ignite suspicion. Then the whisper became a headline, Insider Favoritism, Clara Bennett's Mosaic Role Under Fire. Within 48 hours, Clara's name was plastered across every business tabloid and gossip site in the country. Comment sections buzzed with theories. Was she handed influence without merit? Was Ward Tech using its charitable arm as a personal playground? Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her phone buzzing constantly beside her, a half-eaten breakfast turning cold in her lap. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she scrolled through accusations she didn't even understand yet. One post caught her eye. She was nobody until she married him. Now she's designing multi-million-dollar programs. What credentials does she even have besides a ring? Her stomach twisted. Julian walked into the room, his jaw tight. We're going to get ahead of this. Clara looked up. Did you see what they're saying? He nodded. I've already called the PR team. We'll hold a press conference. Clear the air. But the board. I'll handle the board, he said. You just stay calm. But Clara had spent most of her life being told to stay calm while the world burned around her. She wasn't about to sit still now. At Ward Tech HQ, the mood was tense. Julian stood at the head of the boardroom table, flanked by his legal team. Clara had refused to stay home, choosing instead to stand beside him, head high. We all know who's behind this, Julian said. Blackstone has been trying to undermine this company for years, leaking half-baked internal emails and spinning Mosaic into some kind of vanity project is just the latest move. But perception matters, Julian, one executive countered. Investors are jittery. Stock dipped 3.7% this morning. Clara stepped forward. If this is about transparency, she said, then let's talk about my qualifications. The room went quiet. I earned my place through the Mosaic Initiative because I created it, because I worked with educators and youth centers long before I ever met Julian, because I know what it's like to have talent and no access. And if you think that disqualifies me from contributing here, then this company ain't what I believed it was. The silence held. Then one of the Noor board members, a woman named Anie from the foundation's outreach division, spoke up. She's right. Clara's been doing this work long before it was branded. And if anything, we should be asking why more people like her haven't been at this table sooner. Despite their unified front, the media storm raged on. Julian held his press conference. He calmly outlined Clara's professional experience, the internal documentation showing the process through which she joined Mosaic's leadership, and the vetting protocols involved. But the internet didn't care about protocols. The narrative had already been written. The artist who slept her way to influence. Vortex modern-day Marie Antoinette. The painter and the power broker. Clara stopped opening articles. Even Tesser, her unwavering friend, grew nervous. "Do you want to stay with me for a while?" she asked gently. "Just until this blows over?" Clara shook her head. "If I run now, they win. They'll turn me into whatever they want." Julian supported her publicly, but privately, she could sense the pressure building in him. He was torn between protecting her and protecting the company, his legacy, and she understood. But it didn't make it easier. It happened on a Thursday night, one of those nights when they were both too tired to pretend everything was okay. Clara sat on the floor of the studio, charcoal smeared across her knuckles. A blank canvas loomed in front of her, mocking her silence. Julian was on a call in the next room, pacing again. She heard him say her name, heard the word optics, and something inside her snapped. When he walked into the studio, she was waiting. "You think I'm a liability now, don't you?" she asked. Not accusing, just asking. Julian blinked. "Of course not. But the board does. The press definitely does. Hell, half your executive team does. And now you're afraid to be seen defending me. I defended you every day this week," he said, his voice rising. "I put my name, my companion, everything the line. I never asked you to do that," she cried. "I just wanted to be seen for what I actually do, not what people think I represent." Julian's jaw clenched. "You don't get to act like you're the only one under pressure, Clara. I'm trying to keep both our worlds from collapsing. Maybe they were never meant to merge," she whispered. That silence, sharp and absolute, was louder than any shouting match. Clara packed a single bag, just clothes, a sketchbook, her brushes. She stayed with Tesser for 2 weeks. Julian didn't call, but he sent flowers, not roses, sunflowers, the ones she used to paint as a child, and a note. "You asked me to promise that I wouldn't disappear when this got hard. I'm not disappearing. I'm waiting. When you're ready, Jay." One rainy afternoon, Clara stood in front of a blank wall at the youth center. It had once been a cold slab of cinder block. Now, children crowded around her, waiting to dip their brushes into buckets of paint. She raised her hand, and they began. As color bloomed on the wall, red, blue, green, gold, something inside her shifted. Mosaic wasn't about her. It was about them. The kids, the artists, the dreamers, the ones who had nothing but paint and hope. She couldn't walk away from that. She returned home the next morning. Julian was in the kitchen, stirring sugar into caffeine of her mugs. He turned as she stepped in, his face still drawn with worry. "I'm not leaving," she said quietly. "Not again." He walked over, wrapping her in his arms so tightly she couldn't breathe for a moment. "I'm sorry," he murmured, "for trying to carry everything alone. I'm sorry for thinking I had to walk away to protect us," she replied. They stood there like that, unspoken forgiveness settling between them. Clara agreed to a televised interview on her terms. She sat in a studio, her sketchbook beside her, and talked not about her marriage, but about art, education, equity. She told the story of falling asleep on a train seat, not knowing she'd wake up in a world of privilege, and how she chose to paint a bridge between the two. The interview went viral, but not for scandal, for truth. It had been 18 months since Clara Bennett walked back into her shared home with Julian Ward after the worst public storm of their lives. Since then, everything had shifted, but not in the way Clara feared. The scandal, in hindsight, had become a turning point. Julian's company had emerged stronger. Investors admired how Wardtech doubled down on purpose instead of hiding behind PR spin. Clara's interview had sparked national dialogue around arts access and creative equity. And Mosaic had gone global. 3 new Mosaic centers launched in the last 6 months, one in Lisbon, one in Nairobi, and the newest in Hanoi, each curated by local artists, community educators, and technologists. Each location bore the Mosaic signature: bright walls, open studios, shared digital labs, and rotating exhibits that blurred the lines between engineering and expression. Julian stood with Clara in Nairobi for the grand opening, watching a group of local teens pitch sustainable tech concepts they'd co-developed with design mentors. "I don't think I've ever been prouder," he whispered. Clara smiled. "It's no longer just your empire, or mine. It's ours." And it was true. She wasn't just a founder. Nimesh now served on Ward Tech's global strategy board, but she never stopped painting. Her role as creative advisor was balanced by long evenings in her home studio, hands stained with color, soul still rooted in creation. Julian, too, had shifted. He still ran board meetings and steered the company through growth, but his phone stayed off during dinner. He blocked off weekends for them. He no longer needed to prove his success. Now, he was building something beyond himself. Back in New York, their brownstone had become a haven of contrasts. Claire's side of the house was filled with plants and scattered canvases, art books, and warm light. Julian's study remained sleek, minimalist version of peace. But the heart of the house was their shared kitchen table, where coffee cups, sketches, and spreadsheets coexisted daily. Tessa, now director of communications for Mosaic US, visited often. She and Julian had grown close in their own way, mutual protectors of Clara, trading sarcastic remarks while sharing strategies. "Who would have thought," Tessa said one afternoon, "that the quiet guy on the train would end up launching global art tech fusion?" Julian raised an eyebrow. "Who said I was quiet?" Clara smirked. "I fell asleep next to you." Julian shrugged. "A strategic move." The call came in early spring. UNESCO was organizing a global youth summit in Geneva, and Mosaic had been nominated for its Innovation in Education Impact Award. Not only that, but Clara had been invited to keynote. Clara stared at the invitation in disbelief. "They want me to speak." Julian stepped beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "They want someone who knows what it's like to have dreams and no platform. Someone who fought for that platform and now builds them for others." "But what would I say?" Julian smiled. "Say what you always do, the truth." The week before the summit, Clara locked herself in her studio with nothing but her sketchbook and a laptop. It wasn't just a speech. It was a story of how a girl who thought she'd peaked when she finished a mural in a community hallway now stood on an international stage. How love hadn't saved her but had challenged her to become something more. The night before they flew to Geneva, she read the speech aloud to Julian. He listened in silence. When she finished, his eyes shone. "You wrote a legacy." The conference hall was built like a cathedral of modern glass and steel. Delegates from over 100 countries were in attendance. Clara's face appeared on giant screens as she stepped up to the podium, heart thundering in her chest. She began simply, "I once fell asleep on a train because I was exhausted from 3 jobs and an unpaid dream. I had no money, no plan, just a sketchbook and the desperate hope that one day someone would see what I saw." She told them about Mosaic, about young people in cities, villages, and towns finding voice through connection, not charity. She described the moment she realized that being chosen wasn't enough. You had to build something worth passing on. Access to opportunity should never be an accident, she concluded. It should be intentional, repeatable, and shared. The applause was thunderous. Clara stepped down from the stage, finding Julian waiting at the bottom of the stairs. "You're glowing," he said. She whispered, "I wasn't scared this time." 2 months later, Clara stood before a blank canvas in their studio, unsure of what to paint next. Her exhibitions now booked out 2 years in advance. Her work was in galleries in Tokyo, New York, Berlin, and Lagos. But she didn't want to repeat herself. Julian entered the room, slipping an envelope into her palm. She opened it. Inside was a photograph, a black and white still of the 2 of them on the train, captured from security footage Julian had quietly retrieved years ago. In it, she slept against the window, unaware. He sat across from her, gazing with unspoken curiosity. "I want this to be your next piece," he said. "Our origin story." Clara looked at the photo and smiled. "No," she whispered. "It's not our origin anymore." She turned the canvas and began to sketch something new, hands building together, not reaching across the gap, not separated by gold. By the third year of Mosaic's expansion, they launched a fellowship program for formerly incarcerated youth with creative talent. Julian helped fund a tech incubator staffed entirely by graduates of Mosaic's first classes. Tesser became executive director of the U.S. Julian took a year-long sabbatical from day-to-day operations. Clara opened a traveling gallery series called Unseen Hands featuring artists from underrepresented backgrounds, all of whom had once felt invisible. The world changed around them, but they changed with it consciously, together. On a quiet anniversary evening, Julian and Clara boarded a train from Manhattan to New Haven, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Same car number, same seats. Clara sat where she had that first night. Julian sat across from her. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. Clara blinked. "Another proposal." He laughed. "Not quite." Inside was a delicate gold pendant shaped like a paintbrush wrapped around a train ticket. "I had it custom made," he said, "for when people ask how we met." She leaned across the table and kissed him. "They'll never believe it," she whispered. "Then let's keep living a story no one sees coming." The studio was quiet, bathed in soft morning light. Clara Bennett stood barefoot before a half-finished painting, a brush in her hand, 1,000 ideas on her mind. It had been nearly 5 years since that night on the train. 5 years since she had fallen asleep in the wrong seat and woken up in the right life. Not perfect, not effortless, but true crafted, stretched, broken, and mended by love, labor, and purpose. Julian stepped into the studio, to coffee mugs in hand. He leaned against the doorframe, smiling at the scene that never got old. Clara, lost in color, wrapped in thought. "You forgot breakfast," he said. She turned to him with paint on her cheek. "I'm feeding the soul first." That week, Mosaic was hosting its first international summit in New York City, gathering artists, educators, technologists, and social entrepreneurs from over 30 countries. The theme, Art as Infrastructure, Building the Invisible Bridges. It was the culmination of everything they had worked for, proof that Mosaic had become more than a program. It was a movement. Tesser, now leading Mosaic Global, had coordinated a massive media campaign. Clara was curating the summit's closing exhibition. Julian was co-chairing panels on ethical innovation and philanthropy. But more importantly, they were preparing to pass it on. They had built the foundation. Now it was time to invite others to shape the structure. Clara sat with the current class of Mosaic Fellows in a sunlit atrium filled with art supplies, laptops, and the infectious hum of creative energy. They were all between 18 and 26 coders, sculptors, animators, inventors. Some were refugees. Some came from foster care. A few had criminal records. All had been seen, chosen, believed in. "Tell us the truth," said one girl named a liar. "What's it like to live your dream?" Clara paused. "It's work," she said honestly. "Beautiful, messy, sacred work. It changes shape all the time. Just when you think you've arrived, life asks you to grow again." Julian later joined the session, taking questions about leadership, pressure, and legacy. "Do you ever get tired of being the guy everyone expects to fix everything?" a young poet asked him. Julian smiled. "I used to, until I realized the goal and to fix everything it's to equip the people who will." He glanced at Clara then. "She taught me that." The summit unfolded like a dream, murals being painted in real time by international teams, roundtable talks conducted in multiple languages, performances where dancers interpreted AI-generated soundscapes, and spoken word poems coded into LED structures. The final night, Clara's exhibit opened. It was called Unfinished, a winding corridor of incomplete works, canvases with pencil outlines, half-stitched quilts, sculptures mid-carve, projects still becoming. Each piece was displayed with a simple inscription. Legacy is not about what you complete, it's about what you spark. Critics called it audacious. Visitors called it unlike anything they'd ever seen. But for Clara and Julian, it was simply a mirror of their journey. At the summit's conclusion, Clara and Julian were approached by an international education consortium trying to license the Mosaic model and integrate it into school systems across the globe. It was the kind of offer that could change everything: skill, funding, government partnerships. But it also came with strings: less control, more bureaucracy, risk of dilution. That night, over takeout on the rooftop of their brownstone, Clara mulled over the folder of documents. "What if we lose what makes it special?" she asked. Julian nodded. "Then we walk away. But what if we let go a little and it becomes even bigger than we imagined?" He smiled. "Then we trust the world to carry what we started." And they did. Years later, Clara no longer appeared in magazines. Julian stepped back from public life. Mosaic had chapters in over 40 countries. Alumni ran nonprofits, companies, arts collectives. The movement had long outgrown its founders. But the brownstone was still home. Clara painted almost daily. Her work softer now, less political, more personal. Julian wrote essays and taught part-time at a university. They spent quiet mornings reading side by side, long walks in the park, occasional speaking gigs only when they wanted to. Tessa visited with her wife and their adopted son. Some of the earliest Mosaic students brought their children to meet Miss Claire and Mr. Julian, and neither of them ever rode a train without looking for someone who might just need a seat and a second chance. On the 10th anniversary of Mosaic, Clara unveiled one final piece, a massive canvas titled "The Station." It showed two versions of the same moment. On the left, a girl asleep in a train seat, burdened, forgotten. On the right, the same girl, older, paint-stained, standing in front of an open door. Outside the door, a crowd, not worshippers, not fans, partners, people ready to build the next story. At the bottom corner, in fine black ink, Clara wrote a single line. She didn't just wake up in a new world. She helped create it. Closing scene. That night, as they turned out the lights and climbed into bed, Julian looked at Clara beneath the warm hum of the lamp and said, "Do you ever think about how none of this would have happened if you hadn't fallen asleep in my seat?" Clara chuckled. "Do you ever think about how none of this would have happened if you hadn't let me stay?" Julian wrapped his arms around her, and for a while, they said nothing, because they didn't need to. Their love was no longer a surprise. It was a legacy.